Hello, Dr. Ratzka. Welcome in Brussels. Do you like visiting Belgium?
Yeah, I feel I have special ties to Belgium, especially the Flandern part. And in the early days, earlier I used to come, once a year.
Okay. So you have visited Belgium several times and you have made friends here over the years, including Jan Saba. Would you like to tell us something about Jan?
Well, Yan was much more to me than, or we were much more to each other than just two people working for the same cause. We became good, very personal friends and would talk most of the time, actually, about other things than just in the daily living. And the one thing I admired about Yan and where he was some sort of a role model for me was his very intuitive vision about organizations, whom to build coalitions with, and how to use the existing resources in the community. Um, my position has always been like, the underdog, working from the outside, fighting my way in, so to speak. Whereas he already felt in already. They just had to look over to see how to move the chess pieces around that already existed.
Mhm.
That was the skill I admired with him. And I would often ask him about his advice. And even now that he's been gone for some time, I think about how would Jan have tackled that question.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite convinced that in your conversations with Jan, he must have spoken with some enthusiasm, I suppose, about the Flemish PGB decree from 2001. Shortly after the Flemish independent living movement succeeded in realizing the first personal assistance scheme in our country with the PAB decree, only a year later the Flemish parliament decided to change the complete financing system of all support of people with disabilities into what they call PGB system. This is a direct payment scheme with individualized budgets, giving the user real freedom of choice. He can pay personal assistance and or buy services from service providers. The current service providers for people with disabilities would have to compete to win and keep their clients instead of getting subsidized for the number of people they deliver care in kind to. Only more than 10 years later, less than 2,000 people have a PAB, almost 6,000 are on a waiting list, and the PGB decree still isn't implemented. Now, finally, our current Minister of Welfare declared to realize this new financing system. He appointed a special conversion manager who announced and initiated a public debate on this transition. This debate is currently going on, with as a culmination a big conference on June 6th and 7th. The Flemish independent living movement is happy that finally things are moving, but we are worried too. Will the original idea of direct payments and freedom of choice for all people with a disability survive the public debate? Will we find solutions for the waiting lists? You see, we are in a very important momentum for Flemish disabled people. Do you have some advice for us in this important time?
Well, you're asking too much.
Yeah, it's a very long question.
From the out, no, not only that, but you're asking too much from a person who's observed development only from the outside and who hasn't lived with it. So I'm in no way an expert on the complicated, intricate um, system of social welfare policy here in this country. Um, but the basics are that Belgium is Flandern is a culture of dependency. That the powers to be, government, church, unions, the whole system is geared towards taken good care of us. And they're relying on the family. And we've not been socialized as persons with disabilities to take command of our own lives. Nobody has thought about this, that each of us is responsible ultimately for his or her own life. So we haven't been given the means, and the movement is too young to have spread. 10 years, of course, is in some ways a long time, but in this time, when it comes to changing a whole culture of dependency, it is not long enough. We notice the same in Sweden. We've made a tremendous fast start, a kick start in the late 80s, the early 90s. And since then, we've been losing step by step, losing some of our autonomy. And that's because, as I see it now in retrospect, we haven't been able to change the way people look at themselves and the way society looks at us. They still think that we're hopeless, helpless cripples. But now they're getting money, that's the only difference. And maybe these hopeless, helpless cripples get too much money.
Maybe when I reflect on what you say now, we've seen in Flanders that with the introduction of the personal assistance budget, we thought the fight was won. We would have the personal assistance available now. We, of course, weren't expecting that they would put waiting lists on top of that, but even apart from that, maybe the first objective is to raise awareness and make people aware of that they can live a life which is not a dependent one. And as you tell, even in Sweden, this movement hasn't built up strong enough until now.
If you think about it, we've got all the arguments. The services built on our ideas and principles have been shown to deliver better quality of life. They promote the individual growth. And on top of it, they're even cheaper. So in times of crisis, this should be beautiful but powerful arguments. You've got all the cards, but you don't know how to play them.
Okay, so the advice is play the cards well and raise awareness about not having to be happy to settle with second-grade solutions or second-grade civilianship. That's good advice for us. Do you have any advice for the Flemish politicians in this stage, in this momentum in Flanders?
As a politician, I would look at making the best use of public money. And what does that mean? It means delivering quality of services at a good price, or using existing services in the most skillful way. And institutions have been shown to be a waste of both human and financial capital. And more interestingly, recently, through the ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the investment in institutions has to be phased out. So any new money in institutions is against the convention, and the country can be taken to court.
All right, that's a strong and good advice to politicians, and a warning, something they're not even aware of to a certain extent, I suppose. As last, do you also have an advice to the Flemish service providers?
Well, the Flemish service providers have been living in paradise. As I recall, the late Jan Sabi once said to me, Adolf, what do you expect from a country where every Minister of Social Welfare since the Second World War has come directly into office from Caritas? they've had it made. I mean, they had a powerful lobby. They had direct access to government funds. Then they had a safe pool of people to take care of. They needed us. And we are still there. We haven't left the country. They're still making money on us. They're still doing good with us. They're feeling great about it. And getting the brownie points from the Republican politicians. But watch out. It's not going to take too long. In a few decades, things will be changing materially. And read the United Nations Convention. That's the spirit that will be the spirit of the future. And look at your services carefully, whether you can keep up with these principles enshrined in the convention. And you will notice that you would have to do considerable work in reshaping your institutions, and in fact even phase them out, and moving to the business of providing community-based services if you want to survive.
Thank you. With Onafhankelijk Leven, we are working hard to start up with a user cooperative for personal assistance. Do you think it is important that we do this?
Well, a cooperative has several advantages over, let's say, doing the same thing in form of a, say, a shareholding company. But I would first look into other areas, actually, other questions, whether the services that you would provide are needed in the community, whether people understand what you offer, and whether there is a financial and economic base for these services. In other words, a cooperative is a business that has to survive, and for that you need enough income. So ask yourself first a few hard questions. What are the aims of the cooperative? Couldn't another such form of association achieve the same aims? And most importantly, where's the money going to come from? Lots of questions.
Do you think if we want to make people with a disability as a group, as a whole, if we want to give them more opportunities to take control over their life, to have a more independent life, do you think that a user cooperative has an important role to play in that? Or, as I hear from your first response, does the movement have to play a role in it in a business way?
Well, there are lots of questions still unanswered here. As I understand it, there's an important meeting in June. That maybe the future of the direct funding will depend on that. First, you need to have the purchasing power in everybody's hand to need services. That's the first. Then, second, you need a multitude of operators of services that offer. So the individual consumer can have a choice, because independent living is about having a choice. And among these choices, of course, the cooperative has a very important role, because cooperatives are based on the principle of mutual help, of solidarity, and most importantly, of learning and living with each other. No, not living with each other. Learning from each other.
Yeah.
And learning with each other.
Support.
Yeah, we call it peer support. So these are the important principles that a cooperative entails, and that's a very important element in this range of options. But the cooperative shouldn't just be the only provider of services.
No.
People should have a choice.
So I hear cooperative, there's some conditionalities. We have to have a direct payment scheme in place, which is functioning on a, let's say, a wider scale. Then there is to be a clear objective and a clear plan, and then the first objective is to create freedom of choice, and in that different possibilities, a cooperative can play a role as one of the possible choices and has some advantages as you summed them up. Okay, thank you.
I could elaborate on this. If you look at the Swedish experience, we've had the first condition for a long time. For 17 years, we've been getting the money. And the cooperative solution is still only 3% of the market share. That is, of all these 16,000 people who currently receive the direct payments, only 3% choose, I'm wrong, it's 12%.
12%.
12%. 3%, I meant the people who are individual employers of their systems.
Yeah.
So together these two opposites have only 15%.
Yeah.
And the other 85 have been growing very rapidly. These are people who are still with the local governments, as providers, or with the most rapidly growing section with private business companies.
Yeah. Thank you. You were invited to Brussels for a colloquium yesterday on Article 19 of the UN Convention and the use of European structural funds. It was organized by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Was it a good and useful colloquium?
Yeah, I think it's. I think it was very useful. I cannot tell how proud I felt that we were a bunch of amateurs way back in the, talking about myself actually, in the late 70s, early 80s, started with this, and independent living about it. What's that? Then now it's a household word, and it's used. It's in documents that even the United Nations talk about this. So we've had a fantastic journey behind ourselves. Now, and I can see some advantages that we've been able to bring about over those years. And there's the promise of even more in the future. And what the meeting is they brought out is that now we have instruments and even money behind us. Like the present use of European Union money for refurbishing or even building new institutions, residential institutions in Central and Eastern Europe is against the convention. So the European Union actually can be taken to court for subsidizing the construction of residential institutions according to this convention. Now that's a fantastic leverage that this little movement that started way back maybe 30, 40 years ago has accomplished.
So, yeah, that's certainly so. We will report more on this colloquium in one of the next email or Onafhankelijk Leven newsletters. The UN Convention has been ratified by most European countries and by Europe itself. Gradually, more and more people know this document and what it is about. Every recent text on disability policy refers to it. Do you think we, Europeans with a disability, will be starting to feel some positive effect of the UN Convention soon?
I really hope so. I really hope so, because it seems like most people in power haven't read it. And as somebody at the colloquium yesterday jokingly remarked, they didn't know what they signed. So they haven't even read it before they signed.
So that might be
and it's up to us now. It might be our luck. It was our luck that they didn't know what they were getting into. Then now it's up for us to sharpen our instruments and put them on the squeeze and try to enforce the instrument by using of the law. We have to be getting much better in using the law, legal instruments. And just to mention that as an example, in Sweden we are trying right now getting funds for building up a law center for that purpose. We, as the private sector, the civil sector, specializing on disability, we have to have our own legal top expertise to use all these instruments that we are getting now, that we have been getting, among others, from the United Nations Convention.
Hmm. Okay. The effects of the current crisis are hitting people with a disability even more than other European citizens. There are severe cuts and austerity measures on public expenditure in many European countries. Personal budgets and community-based services are often targeted first. How can this be explained?
Well, if you look at the history of all these services, and if you look at our little history, we've always been like David against the big Goliath. There's been no, we are not in the same league. The lobby of traditional services providers is just tremendous. As I said before, quoting Jan Sabir, the big institutions, they've had a direct way to the government, and which we haven't. Only once I've seen somebody in disability as a minister of social welfare, and that was in Sweden. It was Mr. Lindqvist, who is blind. But these are exceptions. So we haven't never had this kind of leverage and lobby facilities and this. When we go into the European Parliament, I remember it's only embarrassing to be met by politicians there. I remember how the Speaker of the Parliament kissed Bente Skansgård, our then Enil chairperson, on the cheek. And I was reflecting, would he do this with the representative of the European farmers, or fishers, or miners? How can they behave like this? So we are not taking it serious.
And that's why they think they can
get away with everything.
Get away. So we have to show them differently now. Okay. How is the situation in Sweden with the austerities and things going around? Sweden traditionally being a role model for Europe on disability policy in several ways.
Well, Sweden, due to some circumstances, has had relatively little effect compared to other countries, suffered very little from the economic crisis. Only now you can see the economy turning down a little bit. Next year will be worse, but nowhere near as some countries on the continent experience. But it doesn't help, of course, either in the field of policy in disability. The personal assistant legislation, for example, is increasingly interpreted in a restrictive way, more and more restrictive. So soon there will be hardly anything left when it comes to our autonomy. And it's not expanding anymore as it used to be in terms of people eligible for the direct payments, because politicians have been letting the courts make decisions against us. And we are requiring a re-specification of the law that would prohibit these interpretations in the courts. And politicians have said, oh, well, that's a very complicated process, let's wait a little bit. Let's just study it. And they've been studying it. And we're demanding legislative changes, and we haven't been able to achieve them yet.
And is it they now are more severe in the assessments, or?
Yeah.
So they, Yeah, that's the way to do it. Do you think or fear that the independent living movement, that everything that we have been fighting for will be swept away now in a couple of years? Or do you think we will grow stronger as a movement just because of the crisis? Which way will it go?
Well, if one is optimistic, one can say that the crisis will remind each of us there is no way of feeling comfortable if the ocean around you is rising up. So even in Sweden, we cannot be feeling secure because we're a little more up north than you guys. Also, on the optimistic note, you could say that the crisis should make people even more economy-minded than saying we don't have money to waste on institutions anymore, because it can be shown that community-based services are cheaper and provide better quality. So we've got all the arguments, we've got all the cards, we just have to play them.
Okay. To finish the interview, Adolf, do you have something to say, especially to our younger readers with a disability? Do you have a message for the youth?
Well, the question is always going to be, what are you going to do with your life? And who do you think is in control of your life? Is the parents, the social worker at the institution, the civil servant, or is it yourself? And if things turn out bad, who's going to suffer? Them or you? Ultimately, it's us. And if we don't see that we can make a change in our lives, who else is going to make that change? So the first we have to learn is that each of us can make a difference in our lives. And it's very difficult to do it by yourself. So try to have friends in similar situations. Then together you can achieve a lot more than each of you by yourself. And that's why we have the movement. And there are people who have been working on this longer than you, maybe. And maybe some things you can learn from them. Maybe something you can teach them. We all can learn a little bit more. And that's what the movement is for. It's a self-help movement. Traditional self-help movement. And it makes you understand that you're not by yourself with your problems. It's not fault, there's nothing wrong with you if things don't work out. It's a problem, that's a problem for the whole society. The way things are built. If I cannot cross the street in Brussels, is it my fault? Or is it the city administration fault? Obviously it's not my fault. I didn't build these streets that way, I would have built them differently. So there's a lot out there for you to do. You got a mission in your life. You just have to see it. There's a lot of meaning out there, but you have to see it. So don't worry about not having nothing to do. There's lots for you to do.
Thank you very much
Wow.
for
Nice
this
answer.
beautiful answer.